When the world hears the name Iran, it almost always imagines tension. Headlines. Conflict. For years, newspapers, wars, threats. But there is another Iran. Behind that fog of headlines lies one of the most breathtaking civilizations ever raised by human hands. An ancient country, monumental, hushed. An Iran of Persian gardens, golden deserts, mosques that seem painted with light, and mountains that have watched history unfold for thousands of years. Today, we're going to step through that curtain and discover one of the most fascinating and least understood civilizations on Earth. Welcome to Iran. In this very land, there are islands painted in surreal colors, cities crowned with blue domes, gardens built against the dry earth, imperial ruins, and villages carved into stone. It sounds unlikely, and that is exactly why you'll want to see all of it. The Iran so many people picture in only one way is far greater, far older, far more beautiful, and far more human than the narrow frame that has reached us. Today, here on our planet, we are going to cross through the beauty of ancient Persia that the headlines erased beneath the war, not to deny the present, but to reveal everything that almost never gets the spotlight when the subject is Iran. Iran holds a vast position in the heart of Western Asia, with around 91 million people and more than 1,600,000 square kilometers of land. It borders Iraq, Turkey, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. It also opens onto three decisive bodies of water: the Persian Gulf, the Gulf of Oman, and the Caspian Sea. And that helps explain why this country was never just a territory. Iran is a route, a crossroads, a memory, an influence, a geopolitical force still shaping the present. But there is something even more fascinating: the people who kept the soul of this civilization alive. A people shaped by empires, deserts, mountains, faith, trade, poetry, and endurance. A people who learned over thousands of years to turn hardship into culture and permanence into identity. In our last documentary, we crossed through Greece and saw a Mediterranean paradise the world had forgotten. Now, the journey changes temperature. The glow of the Aegean fades, and the ancient weight of Persia steps in. But before we go on, it's worth checking whether you're already subscribed here on our planet, because here, each journey expands the next. And some places, once they pass before your eyes, never leave your memory again. And our next stop will not be a ruin or a garden or a capital. It will be one of the most tense and at the same time most hypnotic places in this entire documentary. A place where the sea carries suspense, the stone seems lit from within, and the whole planet in some way holds its breath. Welcome to Hormuz. Hormuz, the strait that holds the world. Hormuz lies at the extreme south of Iran, in Hormozgan province, facing Bandar Abbas, very close to Kashan Island. It is a small island, arid, rocky, almost raw, and even so, capable of sustaining one of the most intense chapters of this journey. At first glance, it seems like nothing more than a lost fragment in the heat of the Persian Gulf. But all it takes is a careful look to realize that the landscape here was not merely formed, it was set ablaze with color. The ground reddens the horizon. The rocks seem to hold rust, fire, and silence. The island of Hormuz, as historical records note, lies about 8 kilometers off the coast. It is, for the most part, dry and mountainous. Its main permanent settlement bears the same name as the island, and among its most striking resources is the famous red ochre, mined here for centuries. But Hormuz does not impress by land alone. It impresses by where it was placed. Right here, the Persian Gulf tightens and meets the Gulf of Oman. And so the relentless Strait of Hormuz is formed. It is in this narrow maritime corridor that the map stops being a drawing and becomes a nerve, a pulse. Pressure on the planet. The Strait of Hormuz is the only sea passage linking the Persian Gulf to the open ocean, and through it passes a colossal share of the world's energy. In 2025, nearly 15 million barrels a day of crude oil crossed these waters. That represents about 34% of all global crude oil trade. And it does not stop there. Around 1/5 of global consumption of oil and petroleum products also depended on this strait, and a similar share of the world's liquefied natural gas trade moved through the same funnel. In other words, when Hormuz trembles, the planet feels it. Maybe that is why this name returns so often in the news. Ships, threats, retaliation, blockades, military tension. In recent days, the strait has moved back to the center of the world. And suddenly, a place that seems remote began touching energy prices, market anxiety, and the breathing of entire continents. And yet there is something almost ironic here. While the world looks at Hormuz, thinking of crisis, the island offers a beauty that defies logic. Cliffs in shades of ochre, shores of red pigment, bare mountains under a light that seems to come from another age. It is as if the stone refuses monotony. And then an unavoidable question rises. How can a place so tied to fear be at the same time so hypnotic? Perhaps because God's creation, when it pours itself over matter, does not ask permission from geopolitics. It simply appears and unsettles. Here, beauty is not delicate. It is mineral. It is dry. It is rough. It is almost biblical. And maybe that is exactly why Hormuz is never forgotten. It is not the kind of landscape you take in only with your eyes. It settles deep in memory. For a long time, ancient Persia was seen as an empire of palaces, poetry, and trade routes. And it is revealing that one of its most sensitive gateways still remains here, in this scorching south, where the sea keeps watch and the rock seems lit from within. If this was our first shock, imagine what happens when we leave the strait behind and rise toward the urban heart of the country. Because Iran neither begins nor ends at its maritime frontiers. It also beats through avenues, museums, markets, and millions of lives in motion. After the suspense of Hormuz, it is time to cross the threshold that introduces the modern face of this ancient nation. And it is there, at the foot of mountains, amid the rhythm of a mega-city, that the next destination will begin to dismantle everything so many people think they know about Iran. Tehran, the gateway to modern Persia. After the mineral suspense of Hormuz, the journey climbs north through the country, and the shift is abrupt. The sea falls behind. The burning stone gives way to the weight of a capital that pulses without asking permission. Tehran rises at the foot of the Alborz range, in a position that already says so much about it. On one side, urban pressure. On the other, the mountains watching everything from above. It has been the capital of Iran since the 18th century, and today it holds the political heart of the country. The city proper covers just over 700 square kilometers, but its real presence stretches far beyond that limit. The metropolitan area reaches around 14 million people. It is people, movement, rush, and history spread across a scale that is hard to ignore. The most intriguing part is that Tehran changes its face almost without warning. In the north, the land rises, the air cools, and the landscape seems to breathe differently. In the south, the atmosphere turns drier, denser, more punished by the heat. It feels like crossing different cities without ever leaving the same one. Maybe that is why Tehran does not work as a ready-made image. It does not reveal itself in a single glance. It does not fit inside a stereotype. It is avenue, it is neighborhood, it is institution, it is market, it is concrete, it is mountains rising in the background, all at once. Whoever looks at Iran from afar often imagines only ancient ruins, silent deserts, or headlines filled with tension. But Tehran breaks that expectation. It is urban, it is intense, and it shows that the country is also written at the speed of a living metropolis. There is still a deeper layer to this story. Before Tehran took on this role, the great regional reference point was Ray, an ancient city south of today's capital. When Ray lost strength over the centuries, history made room for Tehran to rise along this new axis. And it truly did rise. It absorbed power, drew in institutions, became a center of decision-making, and came to concentrate much of Iranian political life. When the world turns its eyes to Iran today, this is almost always where that gaze ends up converging. But no capital lives on symbols alone. Behind the official facades, there are cafes, routines, families, bookstores, young people coming and going, elders holding on to memory, and an ordinary life that rarely appears in the news. And maybe that is exactly what makes Tehran so important in this documentary. It gives a face back to what once felt distant, It humanizes what so many people learn to see only as rhetoric, conflict, or abstraction. Here, Iran stops being a headline and becomes lived again. Of course, that greatness also comes at a price. The size of the city weighs on infrastructure. Pollution challenges daily life. Water scarcity is a growing concern. And the city's own speed reveals tensions that every megacity carries sooner or later. And even in that, Tehran is striking because it does not try to look perfect. It shows itself as it is, complex, vast, at times exhausted, but deeply real. And that truth holds more power than any caricature drawn from afar. And if you've made it this far, then you've just found the secret word in this documentary: peace. And if it reaches you in some way, leave your comment with that word: peace. Because sometimes, amid landscapes marked by tension, that may be the most necessary word of all. But Tehran is only the doorway. And some doors were not made to keep, they were made to reveal. Because now, after the capital that pulses without rest, we are about to find a city where beauty seems to have been taken to the scale of the impossible. Their blue will not be only in the domes, it will be in the air, in the reverence, in the feeling that architecture, at certain moments in history, almost touched the sublime. Our next destination is Isfahan. Isfahan, the city that feels impossible. There are cities that introduce themselves, and there are cities that appear like a vision, and Isfahan belongs to that second group. After the urban weight of Tehran, to step in here is like passing through a doorway and coming face to face with an idea of beauty that seemed lost to time. Isfahan lies in central Iran, about 420 kilometers south of Tehran. For centuries, its location helped connect routes from north to south and from east to west. It is no exaggeration to say that this city grew where the country's paths learned to meet. It flourished in different eras. It gained strength under the Seljuks, and later it reached an almost legendary brilliance when Shah Abbas I turned it into the Safavid capital at the end of the 16th century. It was there that Isfahan began to be imagined not just as a city, but as a statement. And that may be why so many people called it half the world. A bold expression, almost excessive. And yet, when the landscape opens up, when the scale reveals itself, when the tiles begin to converse with the light, the phrase no longer sounds like an exaggeration. The great heart of that vision is the Maidan Imam, also known historically as Naksh-i-Jahan. UNESCO describes it as one of the largest urban squares on Earth and an extraordinary example of Iranian and Islamic architecture. Here, space was not made merely to exist, it was made to astonish. When you enter this ensemble, the feeling is hard to translate. The eye tries to choose one point, but soon understands that there is no single center. Everything competes for attention. The square, the proportions, the facades. The domes, the monumental emptiness that gives force to everything around it. On one side, the Shah Mosque, today called by many the Imam Mosque, raises its entrance as if blue itself could gain infinite depth. On the other, the Sheikh Lotfollah Mosque offers another scale, more delicate, more inward, more intimate. And between them, the square breathes like the stage of an entire civilization. It is not just beauty, it is intention, it is calculation, it is power transformed into visual harmony. The square itself was born as the political, ceremonial, religious and commercial center of the Safavid capital. In other words, the public life of Persia passed through here. And then something curious happens. Even knowing all of this, even understanding the context, you are still surprised. Because Isfahan does not impress through information alone. It impresses through atmosphere. There are ancient cities that ask to be studied. Isfahan asks to be contemplated. The historic bridges help complete this enchantment. The Persepolis, with its many arches, does not seem merely to cross the river. It seems to stretch time itself. Then there is the Kaju Bridge, so celebrated for its elegance, showing that even a crossing could be designed as art. Here, even the path was beautified. There is also the city's artisanal side. Isfahan became known for work in metal, wood, ceramics, textiles and carpets of the highest quality. And that matters, because it reveals something greater. The beauty here did not remain trapped in official monuments. It passed into hands, into workshops, into everyday life. Perhaps that is the true secret of Isfahan. It does not separate art from life. The splendor does not end in stone. It continues in the patterns, in the objects, in the markets, in the memory of those who create, and in the quiet reverence of those who walk its streets. And there is a beautiful contrast in that. After the pressure of Tehran, Isfahan seems to reorganize the breath. The documentary slows down, the gaze slows down, as if the city itself was saying that greatness does not need noise when it already knows the weight it carries. If this place also awakened something in you, drop a like right now, not as an automatic gesture, but as a sign that this journey also found room inside you, because some cities do not ask for haste, they ask for presence. But Persia still holds another shift in tone. After monumentality comes the city of perfume, gardens, memory, and a light that seems to touch everything more gently. And that is where we are heading now. If Isfahan was proof that beauty can be built on a monumental scale, the next destination will show that the Persian soul also knows how to whisper. And when it whispers, even the stone seems to listen. Our next destination is Shiraz. Shiraz, the echo of ancient Persia. There are places that impress through scale, others through the force of stone. But Shiraz arrives in another way, almost like an ancient perfume drifting through time before it is even understood. After the monumentality of Isfahan, Shiraz changes the temperature of the journey. The impact here does not come first from size. It comes from atmosphere, from softer light, from a more contemplative rhythm, from the feeling that history has chosen to speak more quietly. Shiraz lies in the southwest of Iran, in Fars province, the ancient land that helped give Persia its name. The city sits just under 1,000 kilometers from Tehran and about 60 kilometers from Persepolis. That proximity alone already says much about what it holds. Because Shiraz is not just a historic city, it is a kind of emotional antechamber to ancient Persia. It is as if the imperial past, instead of arriving all at once, chose first to pass through gardens, courtyards, and verses. Over the centuries, Shiraz became one of the great cultural centers of the Persian world. It was here that towering names in poetry flourished, such as Hafez and Saadi. And that changes everything, because when a city trains the eye through poetry, even its streets seem to carry a different cadence. Shiraz is the kind of destination that asks for more than observation. It asks for listening. It asks for sensitivity. In some places, architecture dominates. Here, memory also arrives through symbol, through language, through the delicacy of a garden, and through the shadow resting on stone. And the gardens are a central part of that identity. The Persian imagination transformed water, vegetation, symmetry, and shade into an idea of paradise on earth. Not by chance, the concept of the Persian garden, recognized by UNESCO, was born precisely from this vision of order and coolness amid a dry climate. In Shiraz, that spirit takes shape in a special way. Tree-lined walkways reflecting pools, cypresses, flowers, and pavilions. Everything seems designed to remind us that beauty can also be shelter, and that human beings, when they honor creation, can even learn how to shape rest. There is something deeply Persian in that, creating shade where the sun is harsh, guiding water where dryness rules, raising stillness where the world feels excessive. Shiraz does not display gardens alone. It displays a philosophy of endurance, of refinement, and of contemplation. But the city also surprises through its architecture. The Nasir al-Mulk Mosque, known in many places as the Pink Mosque, shows how light can become spectacle. When the sun passes through its stained glass, the interior is covered in color. The floor seems to awaken, and the morning takes on the texture of a dream. It is the kind of scene that dismantles any hurried view of Iran, because there is no headline-hardened severity there. There is art. There is patience. There is a visual sensitivity that was not born yesterday and still has the power to move, even centuries later. It is also worth remembering that Shiraz held real political importance in different periods. At certain moments, it was beautified and strengthened as an urban and cultural center. That helps explain why it does not feel merely ancient. It feels matured, as if it had learned how to preserve dignity even after the turns of history. And among the places that help reveal the soul of Shiraz is the Shah Cheri Shrine, one of the most emblematic settings in the city. Its facades, its courtyards, and its presence on the horizon show that beauty here was not confined to gardens. It also took shape in devotion, in architecture, and in the collective memory. More than a place to visit, the Shah Chiragh Shrine helps introduce Shiraz to the world, because it gathers together what makes this city so singular. History, spirituality, visual delicacy, and an elegance that does not need to impose itself. It is the kind of place that does not speak only to the eyes. It speaks to the entire atmosphere surrounding the city. If Shiraz has also enchanted you, tell me in the comments what has marked you most so far. Was it the contrast of Hormuz, the pulse of Tehran, or the contemplative beauty of Isfahan and Shiraz? I would truly love to know at what point in this journey Iran began to change before your eyes. But all this delicacy is not here by accident. It prepares the spirit, it sharpens the eye, it lowers the noise. Because what comes next will not merely be beautiful, it will be monumental, it will be foundational, it will be the face of stone of an entire civilization. And when this next landscape appears, columns, stairways, reliefs, and ancient silence will show that Persia was not only memory, it was empire, it was vision, it was scale. The next destination is Persepolis. Persepolis, where the empire still breathes. There are moments when a documentary stops showing only places and begins to touch the structures that held up the world for centuries. Persepolis is one of those moments, because here we are not standing before just any ancient city. We are standing before an assertion of power carved into stone. About 60 kilometers from Shiraz, across the plain of Fars, rise the ruins of the ancient ceremonial capital of the Achaemenids. It was Darius I who began its construction around the end of the 6th century BC, and after him, other rulers expanded that monumental vision. The name Persepolis came from the Greeks, but the city was known to the Persians as Parsa, and not by accident. This was the symbolic heart of an empire that at its height stretched from the Mediterranean to parts of Central Asia and the Indus Valley, a scale that still impresses today. But what is most fascinating is that Persepolis was not designed only to govern. It was designed to represent, to stage greatness, to receive delegations, ceremonies, tributes, and eyes. Everything here seems to have been conceived to say without words, look at what Persia has become. The broad stairways, the meticulous reliefs, the columns raised against the sky, and the monumental platform still preserve that impact. Even in ruins, Persepolis does not feel small. On the contrary, perhaps destruction itself even deepened that sense of historical distance, of weight, of permanence. When you look at the reliefs, you notice something extraordinary. There are different peoples coming from many parts of the empire, bringing gifts, textiles, animals, precious objects. It is not just decoration, it is political narrative. It is stone recording, the breadth of a connected world under one crown. And that says a great deal about Achaemenid Persia itself. A vast empire, complex, multi-ethnic, administered through satrapies, linked by roads, tributes, messengers, and a vision of order that helped shape ancient history. Persepolis was the stage, where that order became visible. Walking here creates an unusual feeling. It is not just archaeological admiration. It is the impression of standing close to an idea of civilization that once believed it had found a way to last forever. History did not spare this place. In 330 BC, the troops of Alexander conquered the city, and the fire that marked that invasion became one of the most symbolic episodes in the fall of the Achaemenid ceremonial center. The flames passed, but the memory remained. There is a quiet irony in that. The empire that rose to be seen ended up crossing the millennia precisely in fragments. And even so, those fragments are enough. Enough to reveal ambition, enough to show refinement, enough to remind us that stone can also keep a voice. And what voice is that? The voice of kings, of artisans, of subjected and allied peoples, of messengers, of architects, of imperial ceremonies, but also the voice of time, which wears down everything without ever fully erasing what was raised with vision. There is something deeply human in Persepolis, the attempt to defeat oblivion. Every great civilization wanted that. It wanted to leave marks. It wanted to impose order on chaos. It wanted to carve into the world a proof of itself. Here, that attempt still stands before us, even wounded, even incomplete. And perhaps it is exactly that incompleteness that makes everything more powerful. Because ruins are not just remains. Sometimes they are windows. And Persepolis opens a window to a moment when Persia was not the edge of a headline. It was center, it was axis, it was a reference point of scale. UNESCO recognized the site as heritage of exceptional value to humanity, and that makes perfect sense. Not only because of the beauty of the structures, but because of what they reveal about administration, art, ceremony, and political imagination in the ancient world. Few places concentrate so much within so little surface. When the wind passes through those columns, there is almost a feeling of an audience, as if Persepolis were still waiting for visitors, as if the empire had never fully accepted the end of its own spectacle. And maybe that is exactly what makes this place so hard to forget. It does not feel finished. It feels suspended. If this journey has already opened new horizons for you, it is worth checking whether you are already subscribed here on Our Planet. Because here, each documentary expands the map, but also expands the way we see. And some places do not just change what we know, they change the way we feel history. But Persia was not built only out of imperial columns. It also learned how to survive, where the climate seemed to deny permanence. After the empire that spoke in stone, we are about to find a city that spoke with the wind, with the earth, and with human ingenuity. Our next destination does not impress only through the past. It impresses through adaptation, through ingenuity, through the way it transformed aridity into shelter and heat into architecture. And when it appears on the horizon, with ochre tones, narrow alleys, and towers raised against the dry sky, you will realize that the greatness of Iran does not live only where empires displayed themselves. It also lives where life learned to endure. Yazd, the city that learned to live in the desert. After the imperial stone of Persepolis, the journey shifts once again. Now the eye finds a city that was not raised to display power. It took shape to survive, and perhaps for that very reason, it impresses in an even more intimate way. Yazd lies in the heart of Iran, between deserts, beneath a hard sky, in one of the driest landscapes in the entire country. And even so, or perhaps precisely because of that, it became one of the most singular cities in this entire journey. At first glance, the city seems made of the same substance as the earth. Ochre tones, earthen walls, narrow alleys, low rooftops. Everything seems to rise from the desert itself, as if Yazd had not been built on aridity, but out of it. There is deep wisdom in that. In many places, human beings try to conquer the environment. Here, they learn to converse with it. Instead of denying the heat, they studied the wind. Instead of fighting the dryness, they invented ways around it. Instead of fleeing, they stayed. One of the most striking symbols of Yazd are the badgirs, the famous wind catchers. They rise above the houses like silent sentinels. But their purpose is not to watch. It is to cool. It is to catch the air, channel it, and help make livable what once seemed inhospitable. When you stop to think about it, the feeling is almost too admirable to fit into a sentence. Centuries before any air conditioning, this city had already learned to tame the breeze. There is something beautiful in that, something intelligent, something that reveals how necessity can sharpen genius. The historic center of Yazd, a UNESCO World Heritage Site since 2017, shows precisely that extraordinary adaptation. The urban fabric, the materials, the ventilation systems, and the disciplined use of water form a rare response to the challenge of living in an extreme climate. And among the settings that best introduce Yazd to the visitor is the Amir Chakmak complex, one of the city's best-known landmarks. Its square, its facade of layered arches and its minarets help form one of the most recognizable images in all of Iran. The complex began to take shape in the 15th century, linked to Jalal al-Din Amir Chakmak, governor of Yazd during the Timurid period. The place was not designed merely as ornament. It brought together religious, urban, commercial, and ceremonial functions, as if it condensed the public life of the city into a single architectural heart. When the eye meets Amir Chakmak, it does not see only a beautiful structure. It sees symmetry. It sees depth. It sees a facade that seems to order the very light of the desert. And around it, the courtyard, the historic bazaar, and the presence of the city make this space a true gateway to the soul of Yazd. There is also here a very ancient spiritual presence. Yazd is often associated with the heritage of Zoroastrianism in Iran, and that expands its importance even further. We are not standing before only a city adapted to the desert. We are standing before a place where memory, belief, and territory continued breathing together for centuries. The narrow streets help create shade. The thick walls slow the heat. The inner courtyards preserve coolness and quiet. Nothing seems random. Everything suggests a long learning patient, passed down from generation to generation, as if the city had been tuned by time. At certain moments, walking here feels almost like a silent lesson. The desert around it suggests scarcity, but the city answers with ingenuity. The heat threatens, and the architecture answers with intelligence. The dryness presses in, and life answers with endurance. It is hard not to be impressed that one of the most austere settings in Iran gave rise to one of the most delicate urban landscapes in the entire documentary. That says a great deal about the creative strength of human beings, and also about the creator's work, which allows, even in hardship, for beauty to emerge. Because there is beauty here, yes, not the exuberant beauty of the colors of Hormuz, nor the monumental splendor of Isfahan, nor the imperial solemnity of Persepolis. The beauty of Yazd is different. It is sober, it is earthen, it is quiet, and precisely for that reason it settles so deeply in memory. Perhaps the modern world, accustomed to quick solutions, has forgotten how to admire cities like this, places where every street, every opening, every thickness of wall, and every current of air carries thought. Yazd was not improvised. It was patiently refined. And then another realization emerges. The Iran we are discovering is not only a land of great historical symbols. It is also a land of ingenious answers, a land of adaptation, a land of people who knew how to turn hardship into a way of life. If this chapter has already made you see the desert in a different way, tell me that in the comments later. Because sometimes, a place does not impress through immediate grandeur. It impresses by changing our measure of what is possible. And Yazd does exactly that. After the winds of Yazd, the journey moves forward, still guided by Persian intelligence in the face of aridity. Only now that response changes form. It leaves the silent endurance of the desert city and takes shape in gardens, courtyards, and spaces shaped for coolness, beauty, and contemplation. That is how Kashan begins to reveal itself. Kashan, the historic oasis of Persia. After Yazd, the journey reaches a city where the desert did not erase elegance. Kashan appears like a refined pause between aridity and memory. A place where gardens, historic homes, mosques, and silent courtyards reveal another face of Persia. Kashan lies between Tehran and Isfahan, along an ancient axis of movement, trade, and passage. And that helps explain why the city gathered so much sophistication in the middle of a dry landscape. Here, architecture did not serve only to protect from the climate. It also served to express prestige, order, and delicacy. The first great symbol of this city is the Fin Garden, one of the most celebrated Persian gardens in Iran, recognized by UNESCO. Flowing water, cypresses, geometric axes, and carefully guided shade. In Kashan, the garden is not ornament. It is a world view. It is coolness drawn in the middle of dryness. What is most fascinating about the Finn Garden is realizing how water organizes everything. It does not merely pass through the space. It gives rhythm to the space. It cools the air, reflects the light, and turns the path into contemplation. It is as if ancient Persia were saying that even in the desert, beauty can flow. But Kashan also reveals itself in its historic homes. The Tabatabai house, with its courtyards, ornamented halls, and highly refined climate solutions, shows how the city's merchant elite turned the home into a form of quiet art. The Ameri historic house deepens that feeling even more. More than a residence, it feels like a small inner universe, made of courtyards, volumes, shade, and proportion. In Kashan, even domestic space takes on grandeur, without losing the lightness that makes everything feel more human. Among the city's most striking settings is the Aga Bozorg Mosque, a mosque and theological school complex that became one of the great faces of Kashan. Its sunken courtyard, the symmetry of its arches, and the serenity of its composition make it a place that holds the eye without needing excess. And there is also the Sultan Amir Ahmad bathhouse, an ancient Persian hammam, famous for the delicacy of its details and for its roof of gentle domes, which became one of the most familiar images of the city. It is the kind of place that shows how even the ritual of bathing could be elevated into architecture. Perhaps that is the great strength of Kashan. It gathers many faces of Persia into a small space. Persian garden, stately house, mosque, historic bathhouse, silent courtyards, filtered light. Kashan does not impress through spectacle. It impresses through balance, through the harmony between water, earth, light, and shelter. Through the feeling that everything was matured with patience, and perhaps that is why it remains so deep in memory, like certain cities that do not need to call attention to be unforgettable. After Kashan, the documentary seems to have breathed through gardens, courtyards, and carefully shaped shadows, but that delicacy will not last much longer. Because Iran still holds another face, where shelter recedes, vegetation disappears, and the earth presents itself in its most severe form. The next destination will not be a house or a mosque or a garden. It will be mineral vastness. It will be absolute heat. It will be one of the most extreme landscapes and one of the most astonishing in this entire documentary. After the elegance of Kashan, the journey will move into a landscape that seems older than human history itself. A place where the wind sculpts matter and the horizon tests the limits of sight. The next destination is the Lut Desert. Lut Desert, the most extreme silence in Iran. After the hidden water, after the measured shade, after the garden as refuge, the documentary enters a world where nearly everything seems to have been reduced to the essential: stone, heat, wind, and a vastness that hardly accepts comparison. The Lut Desert, or Dashti Lut, lies in the southeast of Iran and stretches across a vast, arid expanse between provinces marked by dryness and isolation. Here, the country reveals a face far older, far rawer, and almost prior to any idea of comfort. UNESCO recognized this landscape as a natural heritage site of exceptional value. And that makes perfect sense. Because what you see here is not just a desert. It is a laboratory of exposed earth, a setting shaped by extremes, where the terrain seems to have been scraped, carved, and tested to its limit. In some areas, the yardangs rise, elongated formations sculpted by the wind, as if the landscape itself had learned how to be carved without the human hand. They are corridors of hardened clay, sand, and erosion that create an almost unreal horizon. In other parts, the desert changes once again. Vast dune fields appear, mineral surfaces, dry stretches that seem to have been abandoned by time. There is no excess here. There is exposure. Everything the planet has that is most bare, most severe, most direct. Maybe that is why the Lut creates such a rare feeling. It does not seduce with the promise of shelter. It offers no comfort. It does not soften itself for the visitor. On the contrary, it forces the eye to confront the scale, the dryness, and the brute force of a world without ornament. And even so, it is beautiful. Beautiful in an austere way. Beautiful in an almost relentless way. As if the Creator's creation here had chosen to reveal not the tenderness of shade, but the majesty of rigor. A rigor that does not apologize for being too grand to ignore. For years, the Lut drew scientific attention for its extreme conditions. In certain surface areas, satellite measurements recorded astonishing temperatures. That helped turn the desert into one of the most powerful symbols of climatic intensity on Earth. But reducing the Lut to heat alone would fall short. The true impact lies in the landscape, in the way the wind draws corridors, in the way the afternoon light stretches volumes, darkens reliefs, and makes every ridge feel more dramatic. It is like looking at a planet still in formation. There are scenes here that almost erase human reference points. You see the expanse and lose all measure. You see the forms and lose all sense of scale. Everything feels larger than the body, older than memory, more silent than any ordinary silence. Maybe that is the strongest point of this destination. The Lut does not speak of civilization. It does not speak of monument. It does not speak of empire. It speaks of the earth before us, or at least of an earth that continues to exist, as if it did not depend on our presence to be immense. And that changes the documentary once again, because after cities, gardens, mosques, and ruins, we are now standing before something that was not built. It was sculpted by the patience of the world, slowly, repeatedly, until the extreme became landscape. And if the Lut made you feel the grandeur of creation, it is worth checking whether you're already subscribed here on our planet. Because some journeys are not meant only to show places, they are meant to recalibrate the eye. And after this, even silence seems to carry a different weight. Stay with me, because Iran still holds one more revelation for you, and it will not come from a scorching plain. It will come from inhabited stone, from rock transformed into dwelling, from a village that seems to have been born from the mountain, as if time itself had decided to live there. After the most extreme desert, we move toward one of the most improbable settings in this entire journey, a place where nature carved out forms and human beings answered by living inside them. Kandovan, the village carved into stone and time. After the naked vastness of the Lut Desert, the documentary changes scale, but does not lose its sense of wonder. Because now the surprise does not come from emptiness. It comes from presence. It comes from a place that seems impossible at first glance, and even more unlikely when we discover that it is still alive. Kandovan lies in the northwest of Iran, in East Azerbaijan province, not far from Tabriz. And all it takes is a single glance to understand why this setting seems to have come from another age. The homes do not rest on the mountain. They were opened inside it. The rock formations of Kandovan, born from ancient volcanic activity and erosion over time, rise like cones of stone, almost like giant beehives or mineralized candles pointing toward the sky. And inside them, there are doors, there are windows, there are stairways, there is everyday life. That may be the most fascinating part of all. Kandovan is not just a rare landscape. It is not just a geological curiosity. It is habitation. It is endurance. It is people living where many would imagine only passing contemplation. Here, the rock did not become ruin. It became home. In many places around the world, time carved extraordinary forms, but not always did human beings answer them with permanence. In Kandovan, they did. And they did so in a deeply Persian way, adapting the space, making it into shelter, turning hardness into dwelling and strangeness into everyday life. There is something almost moving in that image. Clothes, windows, paths, and routines existing inside a landscape that seems to belong more to myth than to the present. As if the mountain had been persuaded to receive life without losing its grandeur. Maybe that is why Kandovan creates such a different feeling. After empires, deserts, gardens, mosques, and monumental cities, to end this cycle here is to remember that the greatness of Iran also lives in the unexpected. It also lives in what escapes the obvious script. It also lives in the improbable that endures. And notice how this documentary kept changing its voice. We began with the strait that holds the world. We crossed the capital that pulses. We entered cities of blue and poetry. We touched imperial ruins. We saw the intelligence of the desert. We felt the most extreme silence. And now we end before a village that seems to defy the very logic of dwelling. The Iran we crossed through here was not the Iran of headlines and wars. It was the Iran of layers, of stone that keeps empires, of water hidden beneath the dryness, of light touching domes, gardens, deserts, and mountains of silence, as if it still wanted to reveal something the world almost never sees. Are you watching us on TV and made it this far? Then grab your phone and tell us, did you imagine that Iran guard so many wonders, so far beyond tension, conflict, and the limited image that so often reaches us? I want to know at what point in this journey this country began to change before your eyes. But your journey does not have to stop here, because your next destination is already on your screen, waiting for you. One of those places that almost no one sees, almost no one shows, and that almost never reach the eyes of the world. Come with me and discover the extraordinary around the world. A big hug, and until the next journey,